Congratulations, you've just woken up in rural England, 1867. The air is crisp and darkness still clings to the land as you blink awake on a lumpy straw mattress. It's 4:30 in the morning and your day as a Victorian farmer has already begun. Good news, you've got one of the most important jobs in the British Empire, feeding a rapidly growing nation. Bad news, almost everything about your new life is going to test your limits in ways your modern body and mind aren't prepared for. Your cottage stands as a humble testament to Victorian rural life. A small 2-up, 2-down dwelling with 2 cramped rooms downstairs and 2 even smaller bedrooms upstairs. The windows rattle with the morning breeze and several panes have been patched with paper where the glass has cracked. The roof above leaks when it rains, which in England, is quite often. The floor beneath your feet isn't the polished hardwood or carpet you're used to. It's packed dirt, cold, and sometimes damp. Outside, frost glitters on the fields in the first hint of dawn light. You pull on rough woolen clothing that immediately begins to scratch against your skin. These aren't the soft, treated fabrics of your time. This wool is coarse, minimally processed, and designed for function rather than comfort. The shirt and trousers have been mended multiple times, patches upon patches, because clothing is expensive and not easily replaced. A small coal fire smoulders in the grate, providing barely enough warmth to take the edge off the morning chill. Your breath forms clouds in the air as you move about the cottage. The fire needs tending before anything else happens. Without it, there will be no breakfast, no hot water for washing, and no warmth to return to later. At least I can make a quick cup of coffee, you think to yourself. But wait. That's not an option. While the wealthy might enjoy coffee or tea with breakfast, you as a farm labourer likely make do with a thin porridge made from flour, a bit of butter and water. The porridge sits heavy in your stomach, offering calories but little flavour or comfort. You might add a small cup of ale, yes, even at breakfast, because the water isn't always safe to drink and the small beer provides both hydration and a few extra calories for the work ahead. After choking down your breakfast, you step outside into the pre-dawn chill. There's no time to linger, the animals need tending, and the day's labour won't wait for you to adjust to this new reality. Your boots, stiff leather things with thin soles, offer minimal protection against the cold and damp as you trudge across the yard to the small barn. The animals greet you with impatient sounds. The cow needs milking, the chickens need feeding, and the pig in its sty grunts for its morning meal. These aren't just farm animals, they're your lifeline. The cow's milk, the chicken's eggs, and eventually the meat from your pig will supplement the meagre wages you earn. Without these creatures, your family would likely go hungry during the lean months. The cow regards you with suspicious eyes as you approach with a 3-legged wooden stool and a metal pail. You've never milked a cow before, have you? It's not as simple as it looks. Your fingers, still stiff with cold, struggle to find the rhythm needed to coax the milk from the udder. The cow shifts impatiently, a hoof dangerously close to your vulnerable toes. After several frustrating minutes, you manage to extract enough milk to half fill the pail, a poor showing by Victorian standards, but a start. By now, the first true light of dawn has broken over the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of pink and gold. It would be beautiful if you had time to appreciate it, but the farm's work schedule waits for no one, and you're already behind. The farmer who employs you, for most labourers didn't own their own farms, expects you at the fields by 6:30 a.m. There, you'll join other workers for a long day of whatever seasonal task needs doing. In winter, that might mean threshing grain by hand in the barn, a repetitive and dusty job that will leave your arms aching and your lungs irritated. In spring, it's ploughing and sowing, pushing a heavy iron plough through soil that seems determined to resist your efforts. Summer brings the endless weeding and tending of crops, while autumn heralds the most intense work of all, the harvest, where every able body works from dawn until well after dusk to bring in the crops before rain can ruin them. Today, it's early spring, and that means preparing the soil for planting. The farmer meets you at the edge of the field, his gaze critical as he notes your late arrival. He's a tenant farmer, renting the land from a wealthy landowner, and the pressure to produce a good yield filters down to you in the form of long hours and demanding work. "We're turning the south field today," he tells you, gesturing to a stretch of land that seems to extend to the horizon. "Take a spade and get started on the far end." You look at the tool he's handed you, a heavy iron spade with a wooden handle worn smooth by years of use. This isn't the lightweight garden tool you might be familiar with. This is a serious implement designed for turning large areas of soil, and it weighs enough that your arms begin to protest the moment you lift it. The good news is that by the 1860s, horse-drawn ploughs were common on many farms, alleviating some of the most back-breaking labour. The bad news? Not all tasks can be done with a plough, and many farms still relied heavily on manual labour for a variety of jobs. Today, you're part of that manual labour force. You make your way to the far end of the field, each step a reminder of how unprepared your body is for this work. Modern life, with its cushioned shoes, ergonomic chairs, and general lack of physical demands, has not prepared you for the strain you're about to endure. The first plunge of the spade into the soil requires more force than you anticipated. The ground, still partly frozen from the winter chill, resists your efforts. You put your weight behind it, and finally the blade sinks in. One down, thousands more to go. Within an hour, blisters have formed on your hands. Despite the calluses the original owner of this body might have built up over years of similar work. By midday, those blisters have burst, leaving your palms raw and stinging. The sun climbs higher, but the spring air remains cool, a small mercy as sweat begins to soak your rough cotton shirt. There are no breaks, save for a brief pause at midday to consume a simple meal of bread and perhaps a bit of cheese or cold bacon if you're fortunate. Water comes from a shared jug passed among the workers, another shock to your modern sensibilities accustomed to individual water bottles and concerns about germs. As the day wears on, muscles you didn't know you had begin to scream in protest. Your lower back throbs, your shoulders burn, and your legs tremble with fatigue. But stopping isn't an option. Farm work in Victorian England wasn't measured by hours, but by daylight. You work until the job is done or until it's too dark to continue. Around you, the other labourers continue their work with the steady rhythm of those accustomed to such demands. Many have been doing this kind of labour since childhood, their bodies shaped by years of physical toil. Children as young as 6 or 7 would be expected to help on the farm, scaring birds away from newly planted fields, gathering stones, or helping with the harvest. By age 12, most would be working almost full adult days. You notice one of these children now, a boy of perhaps 10 carrying water to the workers. His clothes are patched and too small, his face smudged with dirt, but there's a resilience in his movements that speaks to his adaptation to this hard life. This isn't just the way of farming, it's the reality of Victorian childhood for many. The afternoon stretches endlessly before you. Your modern concept of time, governed by clocks and convenient divisions, dissolves into a continuous flow of labour marked only by the sun's position and the increasing protests of your body. There are no smartphones to check, no music to distract you, no podcasts to make the time pass more quickly. Just the repetitive motion of the spade, the resistance of the soil, and the growing certainty that you weren't built for this life. By late afternoon, when the sun begins its descent toward the horizon, you've covered perhaps half the area you were assigned. The farmer frowns at your progress, but says nothing. Words aren't necessary to convey his disappointment. The other workers will have to take up your slack, adding to their already considerable burden. As twilight approaches, you're finally allowed to set aside your tools and begin the trudge back to your cottage. Every step is an effort, your muscles trembling with exhaustion, your hands raw and bleeding in places. You've completed less than a full day's work by Victorian standards. And already you're more physically depleted than you've ever been in your modern life. Back at the cottage, there's no hot shower waiting to soothe your aching muscles. Instead, there might be a basin of cold water for a cursory wash of face and hands before the evening meal. Another simple affair of perhaps potatoes, cabbage, and if you're lucky, a small piece of salt pork or bacon. Meat was a luxury for farm labourers, often reserved for Sundays or special occasions. Your small vegetable garden and the animals you tend are crucial supplements to this diet. Without them, malnutrition would be a constant companion, as it was for many poor rural families. The physical demands of farm labour required substantial calories, but the wages rarely stretch far enough to provide adequate nutrition. After eating, there are still evening chores, animals to feed again, perhaps wood to chop for tomorrow's fire, water to fetch from the well or pump. Even your children, if you have them, are not exempt from these tasks. Everyone works in a Victorian farm family. It's the only way to survive. When darkness falls completely, illumination comes from perhaps a single candle or an oil lamp, if you can afford it. This weak light is nothing like the bright electric lights you're accustomed to. Reading, if you're even literate, becomes a strain on the eyes, and most activities requiring fine detail must wait for daylight. You collapse onto your bed, every muscle screaming, your hands throbbing, your back a mass of pain. Sleep, at least, should come easily after such physical exertion, but the bed itself presents another challenge to your modern sensibilities. The mattress is stuffed with straw that crackles with every movement, lumpy and offering little support. The blankets are heavy but not particularly warm, and you may be sharing your sleeping space with other family members or even small livestock in the coldest weather. As you lie there in the darkness, the magnitude of the gap between your modern life and this Victorian reality settles over you. It's not just the physical hardship, though, that's considerable. It's the relentlessness of it all, the knowledge that tomorrow will bring the same demands, and the day after, and every day. There are no weekends off, no paid vacations, no sick days. If you don't work, you don't eat, regardless of how your body feels about the arrangement. Farm labourers typically worked 6 full days a week, with only Sunday as a day of rest, and even then, animals still needed tending. Holidays were few and centred around religious observances or harvest celebrations. The rhythm of life followed the seasons and the sun, not the artificial constructs of the modern work week. And what about when illness strikes, as it inevitably will in a time before antibiotics, modern sanitation, or effective medical treatments? A simple infection from those blisters on your hands could lead to serious complications. A winter cold could develop into pneumonia. A broken bone from a fall might mean permanent disability. The robust health safety net of the modern world doesn't exist here. There's no health insurance, no emergency rooms, no physical therapy to help you recover. The cottage grows colder as the night deepens. Perhaps you share it with mice, or worse, the bedbugs that were common unwelcome inhabitants of Victorian beds. Sleep comes in fits and starts, your body too exhausted to stay awake, but too pained to rest comfortably. Before you know it, the first hint of dawn appears, and the cycle begins again. This is the reality you've stepped into. A life defined by physical labour, limited resources, and the constant pressure to produce enough to survive. And we haven't even touched on the uncertainties that Victorian farmers faced. A late frost could kill newly planted crops. Too much rain could rot them in the fields. Too little, and they might wither before harvest. Animal diseases could wipe out precious livestock. The farmer you work for might have a bad year and reduce your already meagre wages. The landowner might decide to convert fields to more profitable uses, leaving tenant farmers and their labourers without employment. By the late Victorian period, agriculture was already in decline. Cheap imported grain from America and elsewhere undercut British farmers, driving many into bankruptcy. The enclosure of common lands had already pushed many rural people off land they had traditionally used for grazing animals or gathering food and fuel. Mechanisation was beginning to reduce the need for manual labour on larger farms. The exodus from rural areas to cities, where factory work offered at least the possibility of the better wages, was well underway. Despite these challenges, farming remained the backbone of English society throughout the Victorian era. Without the labour of farmers and farm workers, the rapidly growing urban population would have starved, and the Industrial Revolution that transformed Britain might have faltered for lack of food to sustain its workforce. As you drift back to sleep for those few precious hours before dawn, consider this: the life you've just experienced was the reality for millions of people during the Victorian era. Their strength, resilience, and adaptability made possible the world we live in today. The comforts we take for granted, from abundant food to labour-saving devices to medical care, exist because generations before us endured hardships we can scarcely imagine. So why wouldn't you last a day as a Victorian farmer? It's not just about the physical demands, though those are formidable. It's about a fundamentally different relationship with work, time, comfort, and survival itself. Modern life has insulated us from many of the harsh realities our ancestors faced daily. We've lost the calluses, both literal and figurative, that made such a life endurable. And yet there's something to be said for the connection to the land, the seasons, and the direct results of one's labour that Victorian farming provided. In our modern world of abstraction and disconnection, where few of us produce anything tangible and many are separated from the natural world by layers of technology and urbanisation, perhaps there's something to be learned from this demanding but straightforward existence. Tomorrow, we'll explore more aspects of Victorian farm life, the changing seasons, the evolution of farming tools, and the social structures that defined rural communities. But for now, as your muscles ache in sympathy with your imagined Victorian self, remember that the hardships of the past have shaped the possibilities of the present. The cottage is quiet now, the fire reduced to glowing embers. Outside, the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that guided farmers for generations before electric lights dimmed their brilliance. In this moment, between wakefulness and dreams, the distance between then and now seems both vast and surprisingly small. A reminder that while the conditions of human life change dramatically across time, the core experiences of work, rest, struggle, and satisfaction remain deeply familiar. Sleep well, knowing that tomorrow, unlike your Victorian counterpart, you can wake to a world of choices and comforts unimaginable in the 1800s. The greatest luxury of all, the faint glow of morning sun filters through the small window of your cottage, marking the start of a new day in your Victorian farming life. As you stretch your aching limbs and feel the protest of muscles unaccustomed to yesterday's labour, the changing seasons of farm life stretch before you like an unending cycle of challenges and small victories. Spring on a Victorian farm brings with it both promise and peril. The good news is that the darkest, coldest days of winter are behind you, and the land is ready to burst into new life. The bad news? This season demands some of the most physically intensive work of the entire year. Preparing fields and sowing crops that won't yield their rewards for months to come. The rhythm of the agricultural year governs everything in rural Victorian England. Each season brings its own set of tasks, challenges, and small pleasures, all dictated by the weather and the natural cycles of growth and harvest. As you step outside, the morning air carries the earthy scent of soil warming under the spring sun. Today, like most days in early spring, will be devoted to the essential task of preparing the land for planting. But first, there are the animals to tend to, your daily companions in this Victorian farming life. In the small barn attached to your cottage, the cow lows softly, udder full and ready for the morning milking. Victorian farmers, you're learning, maintain a close relationship with their livestock. These animals aren't just sources of food and income, but often treated almost as extended family members. Each has a name and personality well known to their keepers. Your cow, Daisy, is more patient with your clumsy milking attempts this morning. Your hands, raw from yesterday's blisters, struggle with the task, but you're beginning to find the rhythm that makes the milk flow more easily into the pail. The sound of milk hitting the metal creates a gentle, musical pinging that marks the start of every farming day. Once the milking is complete, you strain the liquid through a clean cloth to remove any debris. Cleanliness is taken seriously even in this age before germ theory is widely understood. Some of the milk will be set aside to allow the cream to rise for butter making, a task typically done by women and older children in the household. The rest might go to nearby houses if you have enough to spare, providing a small but crucial addition to your income. With the morning chores complete, you join the other farm workers heading to the fields. The tenant farmer who employs you approaches with a different task for today. "We're sowing the spring wheat today," he explains, gesturing to several large sacks. "The ground's ready in the north field." Spring sowing is a critical task that will determine the success or failure of the coming harvest. In the Victorian era, farming still relies on a deep understanding of soil, weather patterns, and timing that has been passed down through generations. You're handed a canvas bag that hangs from a strap across your body. Into this, you scoop grain from the sacks, precious seeds that represent the farmer's investment in the future. Before mechanical seed drills became common, many farmers still broadcast seeds by hand, a practice requiring skill and an even measured walking pace. "Watch Thomas," the farmer suggests, pointing to an older worker who is already moving across the field with practiced steps. Thomas reaches into his bag, grasps a handful of seeds, and with a sweeping motion of his arm, casts them in a perfect arc across the soil. His movements are rhythmic, almost graceful. Step, reach, throw, step, reach, throw, covering ground with remarkable consistency. Your first attempts are less successful. Seeds clump in some spots and leave bare patches in others. Thomas pauses his work to give advice. "Keep your pace steady," he suggests, "and let your arm follow the same path each time. It takes practice, but your body will learn the memory of it." By midday, your arm aches from the repetitive motion, but you've begun to find the rhythm Thomas described. There's something meditative about the process once you settle into it. The weight of the seeds in your hand, the arc of your throw, the soft patter as they fall to the prepared earth. Behind the seed broadcasters come workers with harrows, large rake-like implements pulled by horses that cover the seeds with soil. This partnership between man and beast is essential to Victorian farming. The horses are powerful draft animals, bred for their strength and endurance. Usually Shire horses or Clydesdales with broad chests and thick feathered legs that seem like moving pillars as they pull equipment across the fields. Working alongside these animals requires a relationship of trust and clear communication. The ploughmen and drivers talk to their horses constantly, using special words and clicks to direct their movements. G to turn right, haw to turn left, a specialized language developed over centuries of partnership. The horse's breath creates clouds in the cool spring air as they strain against their harnesses, their massive muscles rippling with effort. The metal harrow bounces and scrapes across the freshly seeded ground, covering the precious grain and protecting it from hungry birds that circle hopefully overhead. While the men work the fields, women's labour is equally vital to the farm's success, though often less visible in historical accounts. Inside the farmhouse and cottage, the farmer's wife and daughters, along with female workers, manage a continuous cycle of essential tasks. In the dairy, women churn butter and make cheese, activities requiring strength, skill, and careful timing. The butter churn, a tall wooden barrel with a staff inside, demands constant, vigorous pumping to transform cream into butter. It's an exhausting process that might take hours of repetitive motion before the cream suddenly breaks and forms butter globules. Cheese making is even more complex, involving careful temperature control, the addition of rennet, an enzyme from calves' stomachs that causes milk to separate into curds and whey, and the pressing and aging of the final product. A good cheesemaker is highly valued, their skills often passed down through generations. Other women tend gardens that provide essential vegetables for the family table, preserve foods for the winter months, manage poultry, and handle the endless cycle of household tasks: cooking, cleaning, washing, mending, and childcare. This domestic labour is the foundation that allows field work to continue uninterrupted. As noon approaches, the work in the field pauses briefly for a simple midday meal. The farmer's wife and daughters appear with baskets containing bread, cheese, perhaps some cold bacon, and jugs of small beer or cider. The workers gather in the shade of a large oak at the field's edge, grateful for the brief respite. The conversation turns to the weather, as it often does among farmers whose livelihoods depend so directly on nature's whims. "Skies building up in the west," observes Thomas, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of bread. "Might have rain by evening." Weather forecasting in Victorian times relies not on satellites or computer models, but on generations of observed patterns and natural signs. Red sky at night, shepherd's delight. Red sky in morning, shepherd's warning. The behaviour of animals, the direction of wind, the shape of clouds, all are read like a constantly changing almanac written in the sky. The good news about Victorian weather prediction is that many farm workers develop an almost uncanny ability to sense coming changes. The bad news is that even the most skilled forecaster can't prevent the disasters that bad weather brings: late frosts that kill tender crops, summer droughts that wither them in the fields, or autumn rains that rot harvests before they can be gathered. After the brief meal, work resumes with renewed purpose. The afternoon brings different tasks. Some workers continue with the sowing, while others repair stone walls that mark field boundaries or clean out drainage ditches essential for preventing waterlogged soil. Drainage is a crucial concern on many British farms where clay soils and plentiful rain can easily create boggy conditions unsuitable for crops. Throughout the 19th century, elaborate systems of underground drainage tiles were installed on many farms, clay pipes laid in trenches that carried excess water away from fields. This was back-breaking work, digging deep trenches by hand, carefully laying the tiles and covering them again. As the afternoon wears on, dark clouds begin gathering on the western horizon, confirming Thomas's prediction. The wind picks up, carrying the earthy scent of coming rain. The farmer surveys the sky with a practiced eye and calls for the day's work to end earlier than usual. "Get the tools in and the horses stabled," he directs. "That's no spring shower building up." The rush to secure equipment and bring in animals before the storm creates a flurry of activity. Valuable tools are gathered and counted. Iron implements are expensive and represent significant investment for the farmer. The draft horses are unharnessed and led to the stable. Their day's work complete. You help Thomas lead a massive Clydesdale named Thunder to his stall. The horse's hooves, each the size of a dinner plate, thud heavily on the stable floor as he enters his stall with obvious relief. "Good lad," Thomas murmurs, patting the animal's sweaty neck. "You've earned your rest today." The care of working animals is a critical aspect of Victorian farming. Horses represent both a major financial investment and essential power for farm operations. Their feeding, grooming, and health are priorities even when human comforts might be lacking. A good workhorse might be worth half a year's wages for a farm labourer, and their loss through injury or illness could be catastrophic for a small farm's operation. As you help Thomas feed and water the horses, he shares knowledge gained through decades of farm work. Always check their feet after a day's work, he advises, demonstrating how to lift and examine each massive hoof for stones or injuries. And watch how they're breathing. First sign of trouble often shows there. The stable's warm, musky atmosphere creates a cozy shelter as the first heavy raindrops begin to fall outside. The sound quickly intensifies from scattered drops to a steady drumming on the roof. Through the open stable door, you watch sheets of rain sweep across the newly sown fields. Good timing, Thomas nods with satisfaction. Rain'll help the seeds settle in nice. Even adverse weather has its place in the farming cycle when it comes at the right moment. By the time you make the dash from the stable to your cottage, you're soaked through. The rain is cold, driving hard against your face and finding every gap in your clothing. Inside the cottage, your family has been preparing for the evening. A fire burns in the grate, and the smell of something cooking offers welcome after the day's labour. Victorian farm dinners are simple affairs, often based around root vegetables like potatoes and carrots that store well, supplemented with whatever is seasonally available. In spring, early greens might appear, dandelion leaves, nettles, and other foraged plants that provide welcome, fresh nutrients after winter's limited diet. Meat remains a luxury, appearing perhaps once or twice a week in small portions. As you eat, you consider how farming changes from season to season. Spring's work is all about preparation and planting, with rewards that won't be realised for months. Summer brings its own challenges, the constant battle against weeds that threaten to choke crops. The care of growing animals, and the critical hay harvest that will provide winter feed for livestock. Haymaking is one of the most weather-dependent tasks in the farming year. The grass must be cut when mature, but before it loses its nutritional value, then dried thoroughly before being stored. Too much rain during this process can ruin the crop, causing it to rot rather than dry. The entire farm community often comes together for this critical harvest, with all hands employed in cutting, turning, gathering, and stacking the hay. Autumn brings the cereal harvests, wheat, barley, oats, the culmination of the year's work and the time when a farm's success or failure is truly determined. The wheat you helped sow today won't be harvested until late summer or early autumn, months of growth and vulnerability to weather, pests, and disease still ahead. Winter, which you've just emerged from, is a time of maintenance rather than growth, repairing tools and buildings, caring for livestock, and processing preserved foods that must sustain both humans and animals until spring returns. It's also the season when farm workers are most vulnerable to unemployment, as fewer hands are needed for winter tasks. The rain continues to drum on the cottage roof as evening deepens into night. There's a comfort to being inside while the storm rages, though the roof leaks in several places, requiring strategically placed buckets to catch the drips. Your damp clothes hang near the fire to dry, ready for tomorrow's work. Before sleep claims you, there's one more important task: checking on the animals one last time. Bundling up against the rain, you make a quick dash to the small barn where your cow and chickens are housed. All seems well. The animals settled in their dry shelter, untroubled by the storm. This constant care of livestock is a defining feature of farm life. Animals can't be neglected regardless of weather or human convenience. Their feeding, watering, and well-being must be tended to multiple times daily, creating a rhythm that structures the farmer's life around their needs. The next morning dawns clear and fresh, the world washed clean by the night's rain. The air carries the scent of damp earth and growing things, spring asserting itself more confidently after the shower. In the fields, puddles reflect the blue sky, but the ground has absorbed most of the rainfall, a good sign for the newly planted seeds. Today's task is different. The farmer directs you to help with the potato planting, another crucial spring activity. Potatoes became increasingly important in Victorian agriculture, providing a nutritious and filling crop that yielded more food per acre than grain. For farm labourers and their families, potatoes often formed the bulk of the diet, their versatility and storing ability making them invaluable. The planting process involves teamwork. One person digs trenches with a special plough, while others follow behind, dropping seed potatoes at regular intervals. A third group then covers the potatoes with soil, creating the raised ridges characteristic of potato fields. It's precise work, requiring attention to spacing and depth. Plant the potatoes too close and they'll compete for nutrients and space. Too far apart wastes valuable land. Too shallow and they might be damaged by light or frost. Too deep and they struggle to emerge. As you work, Thomas shares more of his farming wisdom. Mind you don't plant before Good Friday, he advises seriously. Brings bad luck to the crop. This mixture of practical knowledge and superstition is common in Victorian farming communities where Christian traditions, ancient folk beliefs, and generations of observed patterns blend into a complex guide for agricultural practice. Some beliefs have practical origins. Planting after Good Friday does indeed usually avoid the worst spring frost, while others are purely superstitious but followed just as faithfully. The work continues until midday, your back aching from the constant bending. Victorian farming tools, while improving throughout the 19th century, still required significant physical effort from their users. The Industrial Revolution that transformed manufacturing was slower to reach agriculture, particularly on smaller farms where expensive machinery wasn't economically viable. After the midday meal, you're introduced to a relative novelty, a mechanical seed drill that has recently been purchased by the farmer. This device, drawn by horses, creates furrows, drops seeds at regular intervals, and covers them all in one operation. What would take several workers all day to accomplish by hand can be done in hours with this machine. Future of farming, that is, Thomas comments, though his tone suggests mixed feelings about the innovation. For farm workers, such machinery brings efficiency, but also the threat of reduced employment. A single machine operated by one man might replace several labourers, a concern in communities where alternative employment is scarce. By the 1860s, various machines were transforming aspects of farming. Mechanical reapers for harvesting grain, threshing machines that separated grain from stalks far faster than hand flailing, and steam-powered equipment that began to replace horsepower on larger farms. Yet, adoption was uneven, with many smaller farms continuing to use traditional methods well into the late 19th century. As afternoon turns toward evening, the physical toll of consecutive days of farm labour becomes increasingly apparent. Your modern body, unused to such sustained exertion, protests with every movement. Muscles you didn't know existed ache deeply, and your hands, despite developing calluses, remain tender and sore. Victorian farm workers developed physical conditioning that modern people can scarcely imagine. Years of manual labour from childhood created bodies adapted to specific tasks. Broad shoulders and strong backs for ploughing, nimble fingers for detailed tasks like shearing or milking, endurance that allowed for 12-hour workdays throughout the growing season. The good news is that your body would eventually adapt to these demands if you remained in this time. The bad news is that such adaptation often came at a cost. Joint problems, early arthritis, and other physical ailments that frequently plagued agricultural workers as they aged. The medical realities of Victorian rural life present another stark contrast to modern expectations. Minor injuries that today would warrant little concern, cuts, sprains, or broken bones, could be debilitating or even life-threatening in a time before antibiotics and modern medical procedures. Farm accidents were common and often serious. Horses could kick or trample, machinery could catch clothing or limbs, tools could slip with devastating consequences. Even without accidents, the cumulative damage of hard physical labor took its toll over time, aging workers prematurely. When illness struck, treatment options were limited. Country doctors, if available at all, had few effective medicines and limited diagnostic tools. Many rural families relied primarily on traditional remedies, herbal preparations, poultices, and treatments passed down through generations, some effective, others merely traditional with little medical value. The evening brings another aspect of Victorian farm life, the social connections that bound rural communities together. As you finish the day's work, one of the other labourers mentions that the blacksmith's forge will be open late tonight, with several farmers gathering there. The village blacksmith represents a crucial support for agricultural communities. Not only does he create and repair essential metal tools and implements, but his forge often serves as an informal gathering place where news is exchanged, deals are made, and community bonds are strengthened. The blacksmith's shop glows with orange light as you approach, the rhythmic clanging of hammer on anvil audible from a distance. Inside, the heat from the forge creates a welcome warmth against the cool spring evening. Several local farmers and workers have already gathered, perched on makeshift seats or leaning against walls as they talk. These informal gatherings serve multiple purposes in rural Victorian society. They allow for the exchange of practical information, weather observations, reports of crop conditions, news of livestock diseases to watch for. They provide opportunities for workers to hear about employment possibilities or for farmers to arrange labour for upcoming busy periods. And perhaps most importantly, they offer connection and community in a time before electronic communications and mass media. The conversations you overhear touch on local concerns, a neighbouring farmer's difficulties after a poor harvest the previous year, speculation about market prices for the coming season, discussion of new farming techniques being tried on a large estate several miles away. Politics enters the conversation occasionally, particularly concerns about cheap grain imports from America that are increasingly threatening British farmers' livelihoods. This economic pressure is beginning to transform British agriculture during the Victorian period. The repeal of the Corn Laws in 1846 removed tariff protections for British grain, opening markets to foreign competition. As transportation improved, particularly with steamships crossing the Atlantic, American grain produced on vast mechanized farms began flooding British markets at prices local farmers couldn't match. The result is a gradual but profound shift in British farming practices. Many farmers are moving away from grain production toward livestock raising and dairy farming, areas where foreign competition is less severe. Others are adopting new methods and technologies in attempts to improve efficiency and reduce costs. As the evening progresses, the blacksmith finishes repairing a broken ploughshare, the metal hissing as he plunges it into water to cool. The conversation shifts to lighter topics, a recounting of the local cricket team's recent match, cricket being increasingly popular even in rural areas, plans for the upcoming May Day celebrations, gentle teasing between long-time friends. You notice how dialect and local expressions colour the speech around you. Victorian rural communities often maintained distinctive local vocabularies, particularly for farming implements and practices. What might be called one thing in Kent could have an entirely different name in Yorkshire, reflecting the relative isolation of communities before modern transportation and communication networks homogenised language. The night grows late, and people begin drifting homeward, knowing dawn will bring another early start. You make your way back to your cottage under a sky brilliant with stars, another aspect of Victorian life notably different from modern experience. Without electric lighting creating light pollution, the night sky in rural areas displayed astronomical features now visible only in the most remote locations. At the cottage, preparations for sleep are simple. Washing up with water from a basin, changing into nightclothes that double as undergarments, banking the fire to maintain some warmth through the night. The rhythm of the farming day, early to rise, work with the daylight, early to bed, follows patterns established by the fundamental needs of agricultural life rather than arbitrary modern schedules. As you settle onto the straw mattress, your body's fatigue quickly overcomes the discomfort of the bed. Through the small window, moonlight casts soft shadows across the room. The only sounds are the occasional lowing of cattle in nearby fields, the soft murmur of wind in trees, the distant hooting of an owl hunting across moonlit meadows. This sensory landscape of Victorian rural nights, the darkness broken only by moon, stars and perhaps distant lantern light, the naturalness of sounds uninterrupted by engines or electronic devices, the earthy smells of soil, animals and growing things creates an environment profoundly different from modern nights with their artificial light, manufactured sounds and distance from natural processes. Sleep comes quickly, your dreams filled with the images and sensations of this new reality, the weight of iron tools in your hands, the smell of freshly turned earth, the rhythmic movement of horses across fields, the texture of seeds flowing through your fingers as you cast them into furrows that will, with time and favourable weather, yield the sustenance upon which this society depends. Morning arrives with the first light of dawn and the crowing of roosters. Another day of Victorian farm life begins, a day that might bring potato planting or fence mending, animal tending or building repair, all part of the endless cycle of tasks required to maintain the farm's productivity. As spring advances into early summer, you witness the results of earlier labours beginning to show. Tender green shoots emerging in the wheat fields, potato plants pushing through the soil in neat rows, fruit trees in the small orchard behind the farmhouse covered in blossoms that promise autumn bounty. There's a satisfaction in seeing these tangible results of work, a directness to the relationship between effort and outcome that modern occupations often lack. Victorian farmers might struggle against weather, pests, diseases and economic forces beyond their control, but they could see the direct results of their labour in the growing crops and thriving animals their work produced. This connection to natural cycles and visible outcomes created meaning in work that, despite its physical demands and limited material rewards, offered something increasingly lost in the industrial jobs that were drawing many rural workers to cities during this period, a sense of purpose and connection to both land and community that transcended mere economic transaction. As you move through the tasks of this new day, your body still aching but perhaps beginning to adapt to its new demands, you reflect on these deeper aspects of Victorian farm life, the challenges certainly, but also the rhythms, connections and satisfactions that defined an agricultural existence, increasingly giving way to the industrial future that would transform British society in ways both promising and problematic for those whose lives were bound to the land and its seasons. The warm sun of early summer bathes the farmland in golden light as you step outside your cottage. Several weeks have passed since your arrival in Victorian farming life, and the landscape has transformed with the advancing season. The wheat fields that were bare soil when you helped with the sowing now wave with knee-high green stalks. The vegetable garden beside your cottage flourishes with rows of peas climbing their supports, potato plants spreading their leaves, and cabbages forming tight heads amid the rich soil. Your body, too, has begun a transformation of sorts. The blisters on your hands have hardened into calluses, providing some protection against the constant friction of tools and ropes. Muscles that initially screamed in protest at each day's labour now accept their fate more quietly. Though the work remains demanding beyond anything in your modern experience, you've developed what Victorian farmers call condition. The lean, sinewy strength built through consistent physical labour rather than deliberate exercise. Today brings a new and essential summer task: haymaking. The sweet smell of mown grass drifts across the farm as you approach the meadow where work is already underway. Haymaking is critical to Victorian farming success, as the dried grass will feed livestock through the winter months, when fresh grazing is unavailable. It's also one of the most weather-dependent and communal activities of the farming year. "We've got 3 good days of sunshine ahead," the farmer announces with evident satisfaction. Perfect timing for the hay harvest. This fortune with the weather is crucial, as the cut grass must dry thoroughly before being stored. Hay gathered while still damp can heat up in storage, sometimes enough to cause spontaneous combustion that could destroy barns and even claim lives. Many a Victorian farmer lost everything to such fires, turning the year's good fortune to disaster in a single night. The haymaking process begins with cutting the grass, a task traditionally done with scythes. Despite the growing availability of mechanical mowers by the mid-Victorian period, many smaller farms still relied on these ancient hand tools. You watch as Thomas and other experienced workers swing their scythes in long, smooth arcs, the curved blades slicing through the grass with hypnotic rhythm. Scything is an art that takes years to master. The mower must maintain the proper angle of the blade, the right arc of the swing, and a steady forward pace, all while keeping the blade sharp enough to cut cleanly rather than tear the grass. A good mower moves with an almost dance-like quality, using the whole body rather than just arm strength to power the blade. "Would you like to try?" Thomas asks, noticing your observation. He offers his scythe, showing you how to grip the wooden handles, the nibs or snaths, positioned along the curved wooden shaft. Your first attempts are clumsy, the blade catching in the ground or skimming over the top of the grass without cutting it. "Keep your body turning smoothly," Thomas advises, demonstrating the gentle twisting motion that provides power to the swing, and let the blade do the work. Don't force it. After several frustrating attempts, you begin to find the rhythm, experiencing brief moments when everything aligns and the blade slices cleanly through a swath of grass. It's satisfying in a profound way, this direct connection between your body's movement and the transformation of the landscape, unmediated by engines or electronics. While the men cut the grass, women and children spread it out with wooden rakes and pitchforks to dry evenly in the sun. This turning of the hay happens several times a day, exposing wet undersides to the sun's warmth. The entire process requires good weather for at least 2 or 3 consecutive days, a blessing not always granted in England's changeable climate. The meadow becomes a hub of activity, with workers of all ages participating in this critical harvest. Young children too small for heavier tasks run errands, carry water, or chase away birds that might be attracted to insects disturbed by the cutting. Older children turn hay alongside adults, learning skills they'll need throughout their farming lives. This intergenerational work environment characterises much of Victorian rural life. Rather than being segregated by age as in modern schools and workplaces, communities functioned as unified bodies where each person contributed according to their ability from a young age. Children as young as 6 or 7 had meaningful roles in farm work, gradually taking on more responsibility as they grew. The good news about this system was the direct transmission of skills and knowledge from one generation to the next, creating deep competence in agricultural practices. The bad news was the limited formal education available to farm children, many of whom attended school sporadically, if at all. Their education subordinated to the immediate needs of farm work. By the mid-Victorian period, efforts to improve rural education were underway. The Education Act of 1870 established a framework for schooling children aged 5 to 13, though it wasn't until the early 20th century that education truly became universal and compulsory. During your time in the 1860s, many farm children still received only the basics of literacy and numeracy before full-time work claimed them. As noon approaches, the farmer's wife and daughters appear at the meadow's edge with baskets and jugs, the midday meal for the haymakers. Haymaking days traditionally feature better-than-usual food, recognition of the intensive work being performed. Instead of the usual bread and cheese, there might be cold meat, pies, or even cake alongside the ever-present cider or small beer. The meal is taken in the shade of hedgerows or trees at the field's edge, workers sprawled on the sweet-smelling cut grass as they eat. Conversation flows easily, the shared labour creating camaraderie across the usual social divisions. Even the farmer himself might join the workers for this meal rather than eating separately, the urgent communal work of the harvest temporarily bridging class distinctions. After the brief respite, work resumes with increased urgency. The afternoon sun is hot, and you feel sweat soaking through your shirt as you help turn partially dried hay with a wooden rake. The physical demands are considerable, but there's a festive quality to haymaking not present in solitary tasks. The shared labour, the knowledge that everyone's contribution matters to the final outcome, the satisfaction of seeing the meadow gradually transform as neatly turned rows of drying hay replace the standing grass. By late afternoon, Thomas announces that the hay turned earliest in the day is ready for gathering into haycocks, small conical piles that protect the hay from dew while allowing continued drying. You learn to gather armfuls of hay and arrange them with the stems pointing outward and downward, creating structures that will shed rain if unexpected showers come during the night. The haycocks dot the field like small golden tents as the day's work concludes. Tomorrow, if the weather holds, the process of turning and drying will continue, with the earliest cut hay possibly ready for storage by day's end. As you walk back toward your cottage in the evening light, your body aching but satisfied with the day's accomplishments, you notice activity at a neighbouring farm. A horse-drawn wagon loaded with various goods is pulling away, and several people stand talking in the yard. That's the travelling peddler, Thomas explains, following your gaze. Comes through every few weeks with goods from town, brings news too, and sometimes letters for those who have family away. In the days before rural mail delivery, village shops, and easy transportation to towns, these travelling salesmen provided vital connections between isolated farms and the wider world. They carried everything from needles and thread to cloth, simple medicines, small tools, and luxury items like sugar or spices that weren't produced locally. Beyond the goods they sold, peddlers served as informal news networks carrying stories and information between communities. In an age before telephones, radio, or television, these human connections were essential channels for learning about events beyond one's immediate surroundings. He'll likely be at the village tomorrow, Thomas continues. Market day. The weekly market in the nearest village or small town was another crucial institution in Victorian rural life. For many farm families, market day provided the only regular opportunity to sell surplus produce, purchase necessities, and connect with the community beyond their immediate neighbours. The next morning, having completed your essential chores at dawn, you're granted permission to visit the village market. It's a 3-mile walk along lanes bordered by hedgerows, white with hawthorn blossoms, the air sweet with their scent and alive with insects buzzing between flowers. Approaching the village, you hear the market before seeing it, a cacophony of human voices, animal sounds, and general commotion that marks this important weekly gathering. The village centre has transformed from its usual quiet state into a bustling hub of commerce and social activity. Farmers display produce on rough wooden tables or directly from the backs of carts. Vegetables, fruit, eggs, butter, cheese, and occasionally meat. Livestock sellers cluster in one area, their sheep, pigs, or cattle penned temporarily for inspection by potential buyers. Craftspeople offer practical items like baskets, pottery, or wooden implements needed for farm and household tasks. The transactions you observe rely less on currency than you might expect. While coins do change hands for some purchases, many exchanges involve direct bartering, eggs traded for a length of cloth, labour promised in exchange for tools, surplus vegetables swapped for preserves or other foods one's own farm doesn't produce. This informal economy functions alongside the more formal cash transactions, creating a resilient system that allows community members to meet their needs even when money is scarce. It relies on direct relationships and trust built over years of interaction, very different from the anonymous transactions of modern commerce. Beyond its economic function, Market Day serves crucial social purposes. Farm families who might go days without seeing anyone outside their immediate household use this opportunity to exchange news, arrange future cooperative work, discuss common problems, seek advice, and maintain the community bonds essential to rural survival. You notice how these interactions follow invisible but clearly understood social patterns. The farmer's wife, who sells butter and eggs, greets different customers with subtle variations in manner, reflecting their relative social positions. A prosperous tenant farmer receives deference from labourers while himself showing respect to the local landowner who briefly visits the market. Children weave through the crowd on errands for parents, already learning the complex social choreography that will guide their adult interactions. As you browse the market stalls, you overhear conversations that reveal common concerns of Victorian farming communities. "Lost 3 lambs to that fox," one shepherd tells another. "Set traps, but the cunning devil avoids them all." Wildlife predation represented a significant threat to farm profits, with foxes, weasels, and birds of prey taking a toll on poultry and young livestock. Another conversation turns to crop diseases. "My neighbour's potatoes are showing the blight already. Hope it doesn't spread this year." The potato blight that caused the devastating Irish famine of the 1840s remained a dreaded possibility for British farmers, capable of destroying entire crops in days. Animal diseases created even greater anxiety, as they could quickly spread through valuable livestock. "Keep your new cow separate for a fortnight," an older farmer advises a younger man who's just purchased an animal. "Make sure she's not bringing anything onto your farm." Without modern veterinary medicines, diseases like foot and mouth, anthrax, or bovine tuberculosis could ruin a farm's economy and potentially spread to humans. These everyday concerns, predators, plant diseases, animal illnesses, represented constant threats to agricultural success that required vigilance, traditional knowledge, and community information sharing to manage. The market served as an informal clearinghouse for such vital information, transmitting warnings and solutions throughout the farming community. As noon approaches, the pub at the market square fills with farmers and traders taking a break from their business. While Victorian temperance movements were beginning to influence drinking habits, alcohol remained central to rural social life. Beer or cider was considered a normal part of daily consumption for working men, viewed as providing necessary calories and hydration for physical labour. Inside the pub, conversations grow louder and more animated as drinks flow. You observe another important aspect of market day, the negotiation of labour arrangements and land usage. A farmer arranges to hire extra help for an upcoming harvest. Two neighbours resolve a dispute about drainage between their fields. A cooper, a barrel maker, agrees to supply new containers for the autumn apple pressing, to be paid partly in cash and partly in the resulting cider. These informal arrangements, often sealed with nothing more than a handshake, formed the working infrastructure of rural communities. Without lawyers or written contracts, such verbal agreements carried the full weight of community enforcement. Breaking one's word could result in damaged reputation and future difficulty finding work or trading partners. As afternoon progresses, the market begins to wind down. Farmers pack unsold goods back into carts, livestock are led away to their destinations, and the village slowly returns to its usual quieter state. You purchase a few small items, a bone comb, some thread for mending, and a precious orange that will be a rare treat back at the cottage, before beginning the walk home. The road back to the farm offers time to reflect on the social complexity you've observed. Despite its apparent simplicity compared to modern urban life, Victorian rural society operated with intricate systems of mutual support, obligation, status recognition, and information exchange. These systems, developed over generations, created resilience in communities facing constant challenges from weather, disease, and economic pressures. Returning to the farm, you find haymaking continuing in your absence. The hay is drying well in the continued sunshine, and preparations are underway for the final stage, gathering it into storage for the winter months. This process involves building large stacks in the field, or transporting the hay to the barn, where it will be carefully arranged to maximize storage space while allowing proper ventilation. Building a proper haystack is another skill requiring specialized knowledge. The stack must shed water through its precisely angled sides and top, maintain its shape through settling, and allow for internal ventilation to prevent dangerous heating. The best builders of haystacks are respected specialists in farming communities, their expertise sought after during harvest season. You join the crew loading dried hay onto a wagon for transport to the barn. Using pitchforks, workers lift forkfuls of hay to a person standing on the growing pile on the wagon, who arranges it to create a stable, balanced load. It's hot, dusty work. Hay particles fill the air, sticking to sweat-dampened skin and working their way into clothing. Many workers tie handkerchiefs over their noses and mouths to avoid breathing the dust, which can cause respiratory problems with long-term exposure. The loaded wagon, pulled by two massive draft horses, creaks under its burden as it moves slowly toward the barn. There, the unloading process begins, a reverse of the loading, with hay pitched from the wagon into the barn loft where it's carefully arranged for storage. Workers move in coordinated patterns developed over years of shared labour, minimising wasted motion and maximising efficiency in a way no written manual could capture. As the golden evening light slants across the farmyard, the day's final wagon load is secured in the barn. The satisfaction of completed work is palpable among the crew. This hay represents security against winter hunger for the farm's animals, which in turn means security for the humans who depend on them. Later, as you wash away the day's dust and sweat with water from a basin in your cottage, you reflect on another crucial aspect of Victorian farming, its vulnerability to forces beyond human control. Despite all the skill, knowledge, and labour invested in agricultural production, success or failure ultimately depended on factors farmers could influence but never fully master. Weather represented the most immediate and visible of these factors. A late spring frost could kill fruit blossoms, eliminating a year's potential harvest in a single night. Summer drought could wither crops in the fields. Excessive rain could rot harvests before they could be gathered. Hail could flatten standing grain in minutes. Early winter storms could kill livestock caught in the open. Against these threats, Victorian farmers had developed systems of weather prediction based on centuries of observation. Cloud patterns, wind direction, animal behaviour, and other natural signs were read like texts by experienced farm workers. These traditional methods had value but remained imperfect, leaving farmers constantly vulnerable to unexpected weather events. Market forces created another layer of uncertainty. The price a farmer might receive for crops or livestock fluctuated based on factors far beyond local control. Harvests in other regions, import policies, transportation costs, urban demand, and broader economic conditions all influenced farm income in ways difficult to predict or manage from the isolated position of a rural producer. During the Victorian period, these economic pressures intensified as agriculture became increasingly commercialised and integrated into national and international markets. The railway network that expanded rapidly across Britain during the mid-19th century brought benefits in terms of access to markets, but also exposed local producers to competition from distant sources, particularly as shipping improved and grain from North America and meat from Australia became available in British markets. The introduction of new technologies created both opportunities and challenges for Victorian farmers. Mechanical reapers, threshers, seed drills, and other innovations increased efficiency but required capital investment beyond the means of many smaller farms. Those who could afford the new machinery gained competitive advantages, while others struggled to maintain traditional methods in an increasingly mechanized agricultural economy. These overlapping vulnerabilities to weather, market forces, technological change, and myriad other factors created a context of persistent uncertainty for Victorian farming communities. In response, they developed intricate social support systems, from informal labour sharing to more structured arrangements like friendly societies that provided basic insurance against illness or funeral costs. As darkness falls outside your cottage window, the farm grows quiet except for occasional animal sounds. Another day of Victorian agricultural life concludes, one small piece in the ancient cycle of growth, harvest, and renewal that has shaped human experience since the earliest settlements. You've begun to understand, in your body and mind, something of what it meant to live within this cycle as a Victorian farmer. The physical demands, the specialised knowledge, the social interconnections, the seasonal rhythms, and the constant negotiation with forces beyond human control. This understanding, gained through direct experience rather than abstract learning, offers insight into a world increasingly remote from modern life yet foundational to the society we've inherited. Sleep comes quickly after the day's exertions, your dreams filled with the sensory richness of this Victorian rural existence. The smell of fresh-cut hay, the texture of soil between your fingers, the sound of scythes slicing through grass, the taste of simple food made satisfying by honest hunger, the sight of stars wheeling above fields your labour has helped to cultivate. The calendar turns to August, and the Victorian farming landscape transforms again. The haymaking that occupied your days earlier in summer has been completed successfully, the barn's loft packed with sweet-smelling dried grass that will sustain the farm's animals through the winter months. Now comes the most critical period in the farming year, the grain harvest. Dawn breaks earlier than you'd like after another night of deep sleep born of physical exhaustion. The roosters haven't even begun their morning calls when you rise, dress quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, and step outside your cottage. The air carries a different quality now. Still warm, but with the first subtle hints that summer's heat will eventually yield to autumn's cooler embrace. Today marks the beginning of the wheat harvest, the culmination of work that began months ago when you helped sow these same fields. The golden stalks stand tall across acres of land, heavy heads nodding gently in the morning breeze. This crop represents not just food, but economic survival for the farm and its workers. A successful harvest means security through the coming year. A poor one could mean hardship or even ruin. You join other workers gathering near the barn where the farmer distributes tools and assigns sections of the field to different teams. Despite the growing availability of mechanical reapers by the 1860s, many farms, especially smaller ones, still harvested by hand using tools that would have been familiar to farmers centuries earlier. Thomas hands you a sickle, a curved blade attached to a short wooden handle. Unlike the long-handled scythe used for haymaking, the sickle requires the user to bend close to the ground, grabbing bunches of wheat stalks with one hand while cutting them with the other. It's precise, but slow work, and harder on the back than scything. Ever used one before? Thomas asks, though he knows the answer. When you shake your head, he demonstrates the proper technique. Grasping a handful of wheat stems with his left hand, he cuts them with a smooth motion of the sickle in his right, then places the cut stalks carefully to one side where they'll be gathered into sheaves. Don't waste any stalks, he advises. Every grain counts. This carefulness reflects the value placed on the crop. In an age before global supply chains and food security, waste wasn't merely inefficient, it threatened survival. Victorian farm workers developed techniques that maximized harvest from every planted field, gathering crops with a thoroughness modern mechanical harvesting can't match. You follow Thomas into the field, joining a line of workers moving steadily through the standing wheat. The work requires a rhythm, grab, cut, place, grab, cut, place, that your body gradually finds after several clumsy attempts. The morning dew soaks your lower legs as you move through the crop, and tiny insects disturbed from their homes in the wheat field fly up around you. Behind the reapers come the gatherers, often women and older children who collect the cut stalks into bundles called sheaves. These are bound together with twisted strands of the wheat itself, a technique requiring considerable skill to create bindings tight enough to hold through subsequent handling. As the sun climbs higher, casting golden light across the harvesting teams, the temperature rises rapidly. By mid-morning, sweat streams down your face and back, and your knees and back protest the constant bending the sickle requires. This, you realize, is why many farms began adopting mechanical reapers as soon as they became available, not just for efficiency, but to reduce the physical toll on workers. The first mechanical reaper had been patented by Cyrus McCormick in America in 1834, with various improvements following over subsequent decades. By the 1860s, horse-drawn reapers were becoming common on larger British farms, though their expense put them beyond reach of many smaller operations. These early machines cut the standing grain, but still required workers to gather and bind the cut stalks by hand. Around midday, you notice activity at the far end of the field. A neighbouring farmer has arrived with a mechanical reaper, offering to help complete the harvest more quickly. The farmer who employs you agrees to the arrangement, which likely involves payment or a promise of reciprocal help with the neighbour's harvest. The machine is an impressive sight, a wheeled platform pulled by two sturdy horses with mechanical arms that sweep the standing grain against cutting blades. A seat perched above allows the operator to control the horses and the cutting mechanism. As it moves through the field, the reaper cuts a swath of wheat far wider than a single worker with a sickle could manage, dramatically increasing harvesting speed. Progress, Thomas comments beside you, watching the machine with a mixture of appreciation and concern. Makes the work faster, no doubt, but means fewer hands needed. His observation touches on the central tension of agricultural mechanization during this period. Increased efficiency came at the cost of rural employment, contributing to the migration from countryside to cities that characterized the Victorian era. For the remainder of the day, you work alongside the mechanical reaper, gathering and binding the stalks it cuts but doesn't collect. Even with this mechanical assistance, harvesting remains labour-intensive, with each sheaf requiring careful binding before being stood in groups of 8 to 10, called stooks or shocks. These characteristic formations, resembling small teepees dotting the harvested fields, allow the grain to continue drying before the next stage of processing. The wheat must remain in these stooks for several days, depending on weather conditions, before being sufficiently dry for storage. During this critical period, farmers watch the sky anxiously. Rain could damage the harvest, causing grain to sprout in the sheaf, or develop mould that renders it worthless. By evening, nearly half the wheat field has been harvested. Good progress for the first day, though several more days of intensive work remain before the entire crop is secured. As you walk back to your cottage, muscles aching from the unaccustomed movements the sickle required, you pass women and children gleaning in the harvested sections, carefully collecting individual stalks of grain missed during the main harvest. This practice of gleaning has ancient roots, mentioned in the Bible and recognised in British common law as a right of the rural poor to gather leftover grain after the harvest. It provided an important supplement to the diets of the poorest community members, particularly widows and children without male breadwinners. Though landowners and farmers sometimes attempted to restrict gleaning, the practice continued throughout the Victorian period, a testimony to both rural poverty and community support systems that helped mitigate its worst effects. The next morning brings another aspect of harvest, the communal meal. The farmer's wife and daughters, assisted by other women from neighbouring farms, have prepared food for all the harvest workers. This tradition of the harvest feast acknowledged the critical nature of the work and the need to maintain workers' strength through the most demanding period of the agricultural year. The midday meal is served in the shade of a large oak at the field's edge. Bread, cheese, cold meats, pies, vegetables from the kitchen garden, and copious quantities of beer or cider. Unlike the usual daily fare, harvest meals often included meat and special dishes reserved for this important occasion. The quality and abundance of the harvest feast reflected not just practical needs, but the symbolic importance of harvest as a community event, rather than merely an economic activity. As you eat alongside the other workers, conversations flow about harvests past and present. "Remember the summer of '53?" an older worker asks. "Rain for 3 weeks straight during wheat harvest, lost half the crop to sprouting." Others nod, recalling this agricultural disaster that affected many farms in the region. "And the dry summer 2 years back," another adds. "Wheat hardly worth cutting, the yield was so poor." These shared memories of good and bad harvests form part of the community's collective knowledge, creating a perspective that extends beyond individual experience to encompass decades of agricultural cycles. After the brief respite of the meal, work resumes with renewed urgency. The wheat remaining in the field must be cut before any change in weather threatens it, and the already cut portions must be monitored for proper drying. The entire community focuses on this single priority, securing the harvest that will sustain them through the coming year. The following days follow similar patterns of intensive labour from dawn to dusk. Once properly dried in the field, the sheaves are loaded onto wagons for transport to the barn or stackyard. There, they might be built into carefully constructed stacks for longer-term storage, or prepared for immediate threshing to separate the valuable grain from the stalks and chaff. Threshing, the process that extracts edible grain from the harvested plant, evolved significantly during the Victorian period. The ancient method of flailing, beating the dried stalks with jointed wooden tools called flails, remained in use on some farms, particularly for smaller harvests or specific grains. This hand threshing was strenuous work, typically performed inside barns during winter months when fieldwork was limited. Mechanical threshing machines, initially powered by horses walking in circles to drive gears and later by portable steam engines, gradually replaced hand flailing on many farms. These machines increased efficiency dramatically but brought their own dangers. Moving parts could catch clothing or limbs, and many Victorian farm workers suffered serious injuries or death from threshing machine accidents. You observe a horse-powered threshing machine in operation at a neighbouring farm. Horses harnessed to a horizontal wheel walk in endless circles, their movement transferred through gears to drive the threshing mechanism. Workers feed sheaves into one end of the machine, which beats and separates the grain through a series of internal operations before ejecting straw from another opening and allowing grain to fall through screens into collection containers. The dust raised by threshing creates a hazy atmosphere around the operation, coating workers' clothing and skin with fine particles that work their way into eyes, noses, and lungs. This threshing dust contributed to respiratory problems common among agricultural workers, particularly those who specialized in threshing operations. Once threshed, the grain requires further cleaning to remove remaining chaff and weed seeds before being stored in granaries or prepared for market. Women often performed this winnowing process using flat baskets called winnowing fans to toss the grain into the air, allowing breeze to blow away lighter chaff while the heavier grain fell back into the basket. Mechanical winnowing machines using fan-generated airflow increasingly replaced this hand method during the Victorian period. After the wheat harvest comes the gathering of other grains: barley for brewing and animal feed, oats for horses and human consumption, rye for bread in some regions. Each requires similar processes of cutting, drying and threshing, though the timing varies slightly based on different maturation rates. By September, the grain harvest's complete. Attention turns to other autumn crops. Root vegetables like potatoes, turnips and mangolds, a type of beet grown primarily for animal feed, must be dug from the ground and stored for winter use. Apples, pears and other fruits are gathered from orchards, some for immediate consumption but most for preservation through drying, making into cider or perry, or storing in cool, dark conditions that extend their usability through winter months. These autumn harvests, while less dramatic than the grain gathering that preceded them, are equally essential to the farm's annual cycle. Root crops in particular provided critical winter feed for livestock when fresh grass was unavailable, allowing animals to be maintained through cold months rather than slaughtered in fall as had been common in earlier periods. With harvests secured, Victorian farms began preparations for the next agricultural cycle. Fields were ploughed again, incorporating stubble from harvested crops back into the soil. Winter wheat varieties might be sown in autumn, their seeds germinating before cold weather suspended growth, ready to resume development with spring's return. These overlapping cycles, harvesting completion coinciding with preparation for future plantings, embodied the continuous nature of agricultural life. Unlike modern work, with its clear demarcations between projects, farming existed as an unbroken chain of related activities, each season's work building on the last and laying groundwork for the next. As autumn advances, you notice changes in the social patterns of farm life. With the most intensive work of harvest completed, community gatherings become more common. Harvest suppers, church festivals, and fairs punctuate the season. These celebrations serve both as thanksgiving for the completed harvest and as opportunities for community bonding before winter's isolation. The harvest supper represents the most significant of these gatherings, a meal provided by the farmer for all who worked the harvest, regardless of their regular status. For one evening, social distinctions diminish as all who contributed to securing the crop share food, drink, and celebration at a common table. Songs, stories, games, and dancing typically follow the meal, creating a festive atmosphere that acknowledges the community's collective achievement. You attend such a supper at the farm, seated at a long table set up in the largest barn, cleared and decorated for the occasion. Lanterns cast warm light over the gathered workers and their families. The farmer himself stands to offer thanks for their labor and for the successful harvest. A rare public acknowledgement of the interdependence that underlies agricultural success despite social hierarchies. The meal features the best local produce, roast meats, fresh and preserved vegetables, homemade breads, pies and puddings, accompanied by liberal quantities of cider and beer. For many workers, this represents the most abundant meal of their year, a brief experience of plenty in lives often characterized by careful management of limited resources. After eating, tables are cleared to make space for dancing. An elderly farm worker produces a fiddle, another a concertina, and simple country dances begin. These are not the formal ballroom dances of urban Victorian society, but traditional patterns passed down through generations. Circle dances, reels, and jigs that allow for community participation regardless of age or skill. As the evening progresses, older workers share stories of harvests past, agricultural wisdom wrapped in narrative form. These oral traditions preserve practical knowledge, weather signs, planting techniques, animal husbandry practices, while simultaneously reinforcing community identity through shared history and experience. You listen as Thomas recounts the harvest of 1845, when potato blight first appeared in the region. Crops fine one day, black and stinking the next, he remembers. No warning, no cure. People who depended on potatoes went hungry that winter. His story serves as both historical record and cautionary tale about agricultural vulnerability, a reminder of how quickly circumstances can change despite human effort and skill. The celebrations conclude earlier than modern parties might. Farm work continues regardless of festivities, and dawn will bring its usual demands. The community disperses through lantern-lit lanes to cottages and farmhouses scattered across the landscape, carrying memories of shared celebration to sustain them through coming months of more isolated winter work. Back in your cottage, preparing for sleep after the evening's unusual social activity, you reflect on the Victorian agricultural cycle you've experienced, the spring planting, summer tending, and autumn harvesting that structure rural life. Each season brought different demands and rewards, creating a varied but predictable rhythm that contrasts sharply with the constant season-independent pace of modern work. This agricultural calendar affected every aspect of rural existence, from daily work schedules to social gatherings, from economic arrangements to religious observances. The church calendar that organised Victorian religious life aligned closely with agricultural patterns, its major festivals corresponding with natural cycles of planting and harvest, death and renewal. As autumn deepens toward winter, the pace of farm work changes noticeably. Field labour diminishes as crops are secured and soil becomes less workable. Focus shifts to maintenance tasks, repairing buildings and equipment, managing stored crops, caring for livestock, now confined more closely as grazing becomes limited. These winter months historically provided time for secondary occupations that supplemented agricultural incomes, crafts like basket making, wood carving, or textile production that could be performed indoors during inclement weather. Such diverse skills remained important in Victorian rural communities despite increasing industrial specialisation in urban areas. For you, these quieter months offer opportunity to reflect on what you've learned about Victorian agricultural life, its physical demands, specialised knowledge, social structures, and deep connection to natural cycles. The modern perspective you bring allows you to recognise aspects of this world that its inhabitants might take for granted. The resilience required to face constant uncertainty, the interdependence that sustained communities through hardship, the embodied knowledge developed through generations of direct engagement with the land. As you drift towards sleep, the sounds of the Victorian countryside create a gentle backdrop. The distant lowing of cattle settled for the night, the soft hooting of an owl hunting across moonlit fields, the barely perceptible creaking of the cottage responding to night air. These sounds represent the agricultural landscape at rest, the brief quiet between cycles of active cultivation that have shaped human existence since our earliest settlements. Tomorrow will bring new tasks appropriate to the advancing season, each contributing to the complex system of food production that sustained Victorian society through times of remarkable change. Your body, increasingly adapted to this life of physical labour, will rise to these challenges with growing competence, though the gap between modern comfort and Victorian farming reality remains unbridgeable in many ways. The continuous nature of agricultural work, its lack of clearly defined endpoints or permanent achievements, represents both its greatest challenge and perhaps its deepest satisfaction, unlike modern occupations that produce finished products or completed projects. Farming exists as participation in ongoing natural processes, temporary stewardship rather than permanent creation or ownership. This fundamental difference underlies many aspects of Victorian rural mentality that might seem foreign to modern sensibilities. The acceptance of factors beyond human control, the multi-generational perspective on land management, the focus on sustainability and continuity rather than immediate maximization of yields or profits. Such differences reflect not merely technological limitations, but profound variations in how people understood their relationship to the natural world and their place within economic and social systems. As sleep claims you, your mind fills with images from the months you've spent in this Victorian agricultural world. Golden wheat moving in summer breezes, the arc of a scythe cutting through meadow grass, draft horses straining against harness as they pull ploughs through resistant soil, community members working together to secure harvests before threatening weather. These experiences have given you insight into a vanished way of life that, despite its hardships, contained forms of knowledge, connection and meaning increasingly rare in our mechanized, urbanized modern existence. The crisp morning air of November carries the unmistakable bite of approaching winter as you step outside your cottage. Frost glitters on the bare branches of trees and coats the remaining cabbage leaves in your small garden with delicate white crystals. Your breath forms clouds in the cold air, and the sun, rising noticeably later now, casts long shadows across the farmyard. Winter on a Victorian farm brings a different rhythm to life. Not the cessation of work that modern people might imagine, but a shift in focus and pace that reflects the season's natural limitations and opportunities. The frantic energy of harvest has passed, the fields now mostly bare except for winter wheat planted in autumn, its tender green shoots barely visible against the dark soil. Today's tasks reflect winter priorities, ensuring animals are properly sheltered and fed, maintaining buildings and equipment, processing crops stored during the abundant months for winter use. The good news about winter farm work is that it generally allows for later rising, with darkness limiting outdoor labour in early mornings and evenings. The bad news is that much of this work occurs in unheated spaces, with cold fingers and toes a constant companion from November through March. You join Thomas in the barn, where the day's first task involves threshing some of the grain harvested months earlier. Before mechanical threshers became common, this repetitive indoor work occupied much of winter for farm labourers. Using a flail, a simple tool with two wooden pieces connected by a short length of leather, you beat dried wheat sheaves spread across the barn floor, separating valuable grain from the surrounding chaff and straw. The work creates a familiar rhythm, the whoosh of the flail through air, the solid thwack as it strikes the grain, the shuffling step to reposition for the next swing. It's physically demanding, but generates welcome warmth in the cold barn. Dust rises from the beaten grain, filling the air with tiny particles that catch sunlight streaming through gaps in the barn walls. Mind you cover your mouth, Thomas advises, demonstrating how to wrap a handkerchief around the lower half of your face. Threshing dust gets in the lungs and causes trouble later. This practical knowledge, understanding occupational hazards and developing protective measures, represents another aspect of traditional wisdom, often learned through hard experience rather than formal education. By midday, you've threshed enough grain to warrant winnowing, separating the lighter chaff from heavier grain kernels. In earlier times, this would have been done entirely by hand, tossing the threshed mixture into the air for wind to blow away lighter components while grain fell back into collection baskets. By the Victorian period, hand-cranked winnowing machines had become common on many farms, using mechanical fans to create artificial breeze for this separation. Thomas demonstrates the winnowing machine's operation, a wooden box with internal fans that create airflow as you turn a hand crank. The threshed mixture enters through a hopper at top, falling against the airstream that blows chaff out the back, while clean grain exits through a chute at bottom. It's an elegant solution that still requires human power but significantly increases efficiency over purely manual methods. The afternoon brings a shift to animal care, increasingly important as pasture becomes unavailable through winter months. The farm's livestock, cattle, horses, sheep and pigs now depend almost entirely on human provision for their survival, requiring daily feeding, watering and monitoring for health issues that could quickly become serious in winter conditions. In the cattle shed, you help distribute hay from the summer's cutting, now stored in the barn loft. The cows greet your arrival with impatient lowing, eager for fresh feed after consuming what was provided the previous day. Each animal receives a carefully measured portion, enough to maintain health through winter, but without wastage of precious stored fodder that must last until spring grazing resumes. The sheep, hardier than cattle and able to forage more effectively in poor conditions, remain outdoors longer than other livestock. Today, however, with frost lingering and weather reports suggesting snow, they're being moved to sheltered paddocks nearer the farm buildings. You and several other workers form a human chain, guiding the flock from distant fields along lanes between hedgerows. Sheep have their own stubborn ideas about direction, requiring patience and understanding of their behaviour to move effectively. The farm's sheepdog does most of the actual herding, responding to whistled commands from the shepherd with remarkable precision, circling wide to collect strays and keeping the flock moving in the desired direction. This partnership between human, dog and livestock represents one of farming's oldest and most effective working relationships. With animals secured and fed, the shortened winter day already fades toward dusk. The farmer reviews tomorrow's work plans, continued threshing, building repair, wood cutting for fuel, before dismissing workers to their homes. In winter, with darkness falling by 4 or 5 o'clock, evenings stretch longer than in summer months, offering time for activities impossible during the extended daylight working hours of the growing season. Back at your cottage, the fire built up before morning departure has burned low. Rekindling it becomes the first priority. Winter evenings without adequate heating range from uncomfortable to dangerous in poorly insulated Victorian dwellings. You add carefully measured pieces of coal, a relatively expensive fuel used sparingly and often mixed with cheaper wood or even dried animal dung to extend its heating capacity. The cottage gradually warms as the fire strengthens, creating a cozy space that contrasts sharply with the cold darkness outside. This physical contrast between protected indoor environments and harsh external conditions defines winter experience, creating appreciation for simple comforts taken for granted in milder seasons. Warmth, light, shelter, and the security of stored food that removes immediate worry about sustenance. Winter evenings in Victorian rural communities offered opportunities for activities that farming's demands prevented during busier seasons. Women used these hours for textile work, spinning, weaving, knitting, mending, producing and maintaining clothing essential for family survival. Men might engage in woodworking, tool repair, or crafts like basket making that provided supplementary income during agriculture's slower period. In your cottage this evening, you attempt some basic repairs to a work shirt damaged during harvest, your stitches clumsy compared to those who've practiced this essential skill since childhood. Clothing in Victorian farm families represents significant investment, with garments mended repeatedly before replacement becomes necessary. Store-bought cloth and clothing, while increasingly available through the 19th century, remained expensive luxuries for most rural workers who relied primarily on home production and maintenance. As you work, winter darkness presses against the cottage windows, relieved only by firelight and perhaps a single candle or oil lamp. Artificial lighting remained expensive throughout the Victorian period, particularly for rural workers with limited incomes. This economic reality aligned human activity with natural daylight cycles more closely than in our electrically illuminated modern world, with work beginning at dawn and largely concluding at dusk, regardless of season. A knock at the cottage door breaks the evening quiet, neighbours from a nearby farm bringing news and sociability. Winter in Victorian rural communities, despite transportation difficulties and physical isolation, often included increased social interaction compared to busier agricultural seasons. With fieldwork reduced, visiting between households became more common, creating networks of communication and support that helped communities through the challenging winter months. Your visitors bring practical purpose alongside sociability, information about an upcoming pig slaughter at their farm, with an invitation to participate in exchange for a share of the meat. This cooperative approach to winter food production allowed families to access fresh meat without each household needing to slaughter and process their own animals simultaneously. The resulting pork would be preserved through salting, smoking, or conversion to products like sausages and bacon that remained edible for extended periods without refrigeration. The conversation turns to broader news. Reports of continued agricultural depression affecting farms throughout Britain. The 1870s marked the beginning of a prolonged economic downturn for British farming, driven by multiple factors, including increased grain imports from America, improved transportation that reduced shipping costs, and a series of poor harvests and livestock diseases that diminished productivity. Andersons down the valley are giving up, your neighbour mentions soberly. Can't make the rent after 3 bad years, moving to Birmingham to try factory work. This pattern, rural families abandoning farming for urban industrial employment, accelerated through the late Victorian period, fundamentally reshaping British society and landscape as rural population declined while cities expanded rapidly. For larger landowners and tenant farmers, adaptation to these economic pressures often meant conversion from crop production to livestock raising, particularly dairy farming and meat production, less vulnerable to foreign competition. For agricultural labourers, however, these changes frequently meant reduced employment opportunities as livestock required fewer workers than crop cultivation, further driving migration toward urban areas. The late Victorian period witnessed these transformative changes moving through rural communities like waves, affecting different regions and types of farms at different rates but gradually reshaping the agricultural landscape throughout Britain. Traditional farming practices that had remained relatively stable for centuries underwent rapid evolution under economic pressures, technological innovation, and shifting social patterns. Your visitors depart after finalising arrangements for the pig slaughter, leaving you alone again in the flickering firelight. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter begin drifting past your window, not yet the heavy accumulation that might temporarily isolate farms from each other, but a reminder of winter's power to transform the landscape and restrict movement. Morning arrives with a transformed world, several inches of snow covering the farm in pristine white, smoothing the contours of fields and buildings into softer shapes. The cold intensifies with snow cover, your breath visible even inside the cottage before the fire has been built up to working temperature. Despite the beauty, snow brings practical challenges that shape the day's activities. First priorities remain unchanged. Animals must be fed and watered regardless of weather conditions. Moving through snow-covered farmyard to the barn, you notice how your footprints join others already marking the white surface. The farmer and other workers ensuring livestock received early morning attention even in difficult conditions. Inside the barn, the atmosphere feels almost warm compared to the external air, the combined body heat of animals creating natural warming in their enclosed space. This practical understanding of animal heat informed barn design and winter management practices, with livestock sometimes housed in arrangements that allowed their warmth to benefit human living spaces as well. The day's planned fieldwork shifts in response to snow conditions. Threshing continues inside the barn, but outdoor tasks become focused on ensuring access to essential areas. You join a team clearing paths between farm buildings, creating routes that allow movement of people, animals, and supplies without the exhausting effort of continually breaking through deep snow. By afternoon, with necessary snow clearing complete and animals secured with additional feed in anticipation of continuing cold, the farmer announces a half day of work. This flexibility in winter scheduling reflects both practical limitations, some tasks simply become impossible in severe weather, and the economic reality that landlords often reduced labour requirements during winter months when productivity naturally decreased. For farm workers on daily wages rather than annual contracts, such weather-related reductions in work could create significant hardship. Victorian rural communities developed various support systems to address this seasonal vulnerability, from landlords providing basic sustenance for tenants during difficult periods to informal community sharing of resources among neighbours of similar economic status. More formal support came through the poor law system, though its assistance often carried social stigma and potentially harsh conditions, particularly after the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 established the workhouse system. Most rural families went to extraordinary lengths to avoid relying on poor law assistance, turning to it only in the most desperate circumstances when community and family support proved insufficient. The early end to the workday offers opportunity for a different winter activity, a visit to the village school where your younger children receive basic education. The Education Acts of 1870 and subsequent years gradually established more comprehensive schooling for rural children, though attendance often remained irregular due to families' need for children's labour during busy agricultural periods. The small village school occupies a single room, with children of various ages grouped together under the supervision of one teacher. On this snowy afternoon, perhaps 30 students practice writing on slates, recite multiplication tables, or read from shared texts, the fundamental literacy and numeracy that represented formal education for most Victorian rural children. Winter attendance typically exceeds that of harvest seasons, when even young children's contributions to fieldwork might be deemed essential to family survival. This seasonal pattern of education meant many farm children received fragmented schooling, developing basic skills, but lacking the continuous progression that more consistent attendance would allow. The teacher, a young woman with formal training increasingly common by late Victorian period, maintains remarkable order among her diverse group. Educational methods emphasize memorization, recitation, and practical skills considered useful for students' likely future occupations. Focus differs noticeably between boys expected to follow agricultural or trade paths and girls presumed destined for domestic service or household management. Your visit concludes with arrangements for older children to assist with the pig slaughter planned for coming days, practical education in essential rural skills occurring outside formal schooling. This combination of institutional learning and practical knowledge transmitted through direct participation characterized Victorian rural childhood, creating individuals prepared for the specific demands of agricultural life. The walk home through snow-covered lanes offers moments of unexpected beauty, winter sunlight casting blue shadows across white fields, birds leaving delicate track patterns as they search for food, ice crystals transforming ordinary branches into glittering sculptures. Despite its harshness, winter in rural landscapes provides aesthetic experiences largely lost to modern urban dwellers. Connections to natural patterns increasingly rare in industrialized societies. The following days bring traditional winter activities centered around food preservation. The pig slaughter proceeds as planned, creating an intensive period of communal work as the animal is processed into various products designed for extended storage. Nothing is wasted in this process, from prime cuts preserved as bacon or ham to organs incorporated into sausages, blood used for puddings, fat rendered into lard for cooking, and even bones utilized for stock or tools. This intensive processing represents a key aspect of pre-industrial food systems, the transformation of seasonal abundance into storable forms that extend availability through scarcity periods. Before refrigeration, such preservation techniques formed the foundation of food security, with winter serving as both challenge to overcome and opportunity for preparing resources that would sustain communities through coming months. As December advances, another dimension of Victorian rural life becomes apparent: the religious and social observances that mark the calendar. Christmas preparations begin gradually, incorporating both ancient traditions and newer Victorian innovations that were transforming the holiday throughout British society during this period. Rural Christmas celebrations typically remained more connected to agricultural traditions and pre-Victorian customs than their urban counterparts. Decorations featured natural materials gathered from the landscape, holly, ivy, mistletoe, rather than manufactured ornaments increasingly available in towns and cities. Foods reflected local production and preservation methods, with regional variations in special dishes prepared only for this annual celebration. The emotional significance of Christmas in Victorian farming communities extended beyond religious observance to include crucial social functions: the gathering of often dispersed family members, reinforcement of community bonds through shared celebration, and creation of brightness during the darkest, coldest period of the agricultural year. These practical and psychological functions gave the holiday importance even in communities where religious devotion might vary widely. As the year draws toward its close, you find yourself reflecting on the Victorian agricultural cycle you've experienced through the seasons. The spring planting full of potential and uncertainty, summer's intensive growth and care, autumn's crucial harvests determining success or failure, and winter's combination of hardship and essential rest. This continuous cycle, followed with variations for centuries, shaped not just practical activities but fundamental perspectives on time, work, and human relationship to natural processes. The Victorian period represents a crucial transition in this agricultural pattern, traditional methods and social organisations persisting alongside emerging technologies, economic systems, and social changes that would eventually transform rural life beyond recognition. Standing in this transitional moment, you've witnessed both ancient practices that would soon disappear and early manifestations of modernisation that would eventually dominate. What makes lasting impressions are not just the physical demands that would indeed prevent most modern people from lasting even a day in Victorian farming life, but the profound differences in relationship to time, community, and natural systems that this agricultural existence created. The Victorian farmer lived within constraints and rhythms increasingly foreign to modern experience. Seasonal determinism rather than technological override of natural limitations, direct connection between personal labour and survival outcomes, community interdependence rather than institutional support systems. These differences extended to fundamental concepts modern people often take for granted: the nature of food as something produced through visible, tangible processes rather than appearing through complex, invisible supply chains, the experience of darkness and cold as inevitable seasonal realities rather than conditions automatically eliminated by technological intervention, the understanding of work as physically embodied rather than abstracted into information manipulation. The Victorian agricultural world you've inhabited through these seasons offered hardships modern people would find intolerable: physical demands beyond contemporary conditioning, absence of medical interventions now considered basic, housing conditions lacking fundamental comforts, vulnerability to weather and natural disasters without technological buffers. Yet it also provided experiences increasingly rare in modern life: direct connection to food production, interdependent community relationships, seasonal rhythms that aligned human activity with natural cycles, and tangible relationships between effort and outcome. As your time in this Victorian farming life concludes, you carry with you deeper understanding of both what has been lost and gained in the transitions that separated that world from our own. The physical hardships, limited opportunities, social restrictions, and vulnerabilities to disease and disaster represent genuine progress overcome through subsequent generations' innovations. Yet the connections to land, community, seasonal rhythms, and direct production represent values worth reconsidering in our technologically mediated present. Perhaps the most valuable insight from this journey through Victorian farm life is the perspective it offers on our relationship with food, that most fundamental necessity transformed almost beyond recognition between their time and ours. The Victorian farmer experienced food as the direct result of visible labour, valued according to the effort required for its production, connected to specific landscapes and communities, and subject to natural limitations that no amount of human intervention could fully overcome. This perspective offers an alternative to modern food systems characterized by invisibility, disconnection, apparent abundance, divorced from production realities, and technological mediation that obscures natural limitations. Without romanticizing the genuine hardships of Victorian agriculture, we might still recognize the value in more conscious connection to food production, not necessarily by returning to Victorian methods, but by bringing greater awareness to the systems that sustain us. Similarly, the Victorian agricultural relationship with time, governed by daylight, seasons, and natural growth cycles rather than artificial schedules, offers perspective on our own increasingly detached temporal experiences. The rhythms that governed farm life connected human activity to natural patterns in ways that modern schedules often deliberately override, creating potential disconnections from biological and ecological realities that shape our existence regardless of technological mediation. As you drift towards sleep on this winter evening in Victorian farm life, the contrasts between that world and our own crystallize into clearer understanding. You wouldn't last a day as a Victorian farmer not simply because of physical demands, though those would indeed prove overwhelming for most modern bodies, but because that existence required fundamentally different relationships with food, community, time, and natural processes than those that structure contemporary life.